Hi, this is Sergeant Betsy Brandner Smith at the National Police Association, and this is the National Police Association podcast. I have a guest with me today who is an amazing, prolific writer. I too am a writer, but this guy, I write articles about law enforcement and officer safety and leadership. This guy writes incredible books. And not only does he author books, and by the way, he's a super popular author on Amazon, but he also has a really interesting podcast. So I thought that you needed to meet him. So, Sergeant Patrick O'Donnell, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, Sarge, I got to ask you, we were just talking about this off the air, how sergeant is the best job in any agency. And of course, we do the most work, don't we?
Absolutely.
But I got to ask you what I ask everybody who's in law enforcement who comes on the show. Why'd you become a cop?
Well, I'm first generation Irish, so I didn't have much choice. Either I become a cop, a firefighter, or a politician. I hate politics. I don't like heights, so as default, I guess I'm destined to become a police officer, right? Well, I was born in Chicago, and as a wee lad, I was fascinated by the Chicago coppers going up and down the roads with the blue flashing lights. I always thought it was super cool as a little kid. And I had a moment where we moved to the suburbs and our neighbor's house was getting raided. They're like executing a search warrant on our neighbor's house. And I was like, maybe, I don't know, 9 or 10 years old, maybe a little bit older. And I remember it like it was yesterday because you see the stack, coming of these like SWAT officers. There's two of them in our backyard. One's got an M16 and the other one's got a shotgun. And I'll never forget it. I'm like, Mom, look at this. And they're creeping up on the side door. And our kitchen window was perfectly, you had a clear view of what's going on. All these houses are super close to each other. And my mom was like, "Oh, Jesus, Mary and Joseph, what's going on here?" So they got the shield, they got the ram, they ram down the door, they're pulling people out by their hair, and I'm like, "This is the coolest job ever. I got to do this for a living. Oh my God, they get paid for this?" And I'm like, "This is crazy." So, obviously, I was born in '64, so Adam 12, SWAT. Starsky and Hutch, Beretta, all these really, the Rockford Files, Columbo, all these
All
awesome
my
TV
favorite
shows.
shows, Pat.
Yes. Oh my God. We were so lucky we grew up in that era that
Absolutely.
that you were exposed to these TV shows. I mean, yeah, were they corny? Of course. Was the procedure right? Eh, Adam 12 was probably pretty close. But there was like almost no humor in that. But hey, it was fun to watch, and I just thought it was cool. Then fast forward years by, I'm in college. I started as a music major, and that did not work out. And I'm like, well, I still have the police bug. I did an internship with the sheriff's department in Milwaukee, and I was hooked. Back then, I mean, it was funny because it was between Madison and Milwaukee. I interviewed with Madison, and they're like, "Well, most of our interns are Rhodes scholars." And I'm like, "That's not me. I got kicked out of college twice. Are you kidding me?" "Well, we want you to write, at least 6 research papers." But I'm like, I'm looking at this guy, and I'm like, "Am I gonna get to ride around and do cool police stuff?" And he's like, "What are you talking about? You'll be behind a desk most of the time." I'm like, "Ooh, no, that's not me." So then I go to Milwaukee, and it's like, "Yeah, you might have to write one paper at the very end, and I'm gonna put you in the jail right away. You're gonna be right next to the deputies. You're gonna do everything the deputies are doing except for arresting people." And I'm like, "Sign me up. This is cool." This is back in '86. And it was literally the Wild West, and the crack wars were full throttle. It was just crazyville, USA. And I just had a blast. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. So I'm like, yep, got to do it.
I love it. So here you are, you're in Milwaukee, and I mean, that was just as busy in the 80s as it is now.
Oh, yeah.
And tell us a little bit about your career. What was your favorite assignment?
Boy, that's hard to. I started in patrol like everybody else does, but I didn't know the city of Milwaukee. I was living in Madison at the time. I went to University of Wisconsin Whitewater. I lived in a little town. My parents moved us from Chicago to Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin, a town of 10,000 people when I was a freshman in high school. So I felt like I landed on Mars. I mean, it was just, where the hell am I? This is crazy. So I wound up going to college in Whitewater, moved to Madison, and I'm armed with a sociology degree, so I was qualified to be a restaurant manager, a used car salesman, a bartender. I did all those things because it was really hard to get a police job back then. Affirmative action was full steam ahead. The city of Milwaukee, each academy class had to be 25% majority male, 25% minority male. Same thing with females. And when I took the test, there was like 4,000 people, for I don't know how many positions, and I was on the waiting list for 4 years. So, sorry to digress, but yeah, that was a tough time.
People, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because people have no idea. I was recently talking to a reporter about police recruitment, and I was telling them that thousands of
Oh,
applicants would show up to test
yep,
for pretty much any major city or suburb in the nation,
yes.
and they were stunned. They were young, so they were stunned to hear that.
Oh, absolutely. So, I was on the waiting list for 4 years to get into the academy. So I finally get in. I get assigned to District 5, and I didn't know Milwaukee, and there's no Google whatever, there was no GPS. So our last day at the academy, they gave us the afternoon off to go to our work assignment. And I'm driving around and I'm like, well, I'm from Chicago. I know what a bad neighborhood looks like. And that's where they're sending me. There's the block where the district station is, it looks like, a concrete freaking, like bunker. And there's, houses that are all boarded up, or there's no house there. There used to be a house there, vacant lots. And it just looked horrible. There's garbage everywhere. And it's just icky. There's no nicer way to put it. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was blessed to go there because it was nonstop action. As a new cop, you're just like every night was some kind of shooting. Every night was some kind of chase. Every night, it never stopped. So I worked there for about 7 years on late shift, working midnight to 8 as a,
That's a rookie's dream.
oh, it should be. Yeah, it should be. It's not for everyone. I'll say that for sure. But for me, I thought it was awesome. I couldn't have been happier. Not that people were getting hurt or killed or anything like that, but the excitement of all of it. And the only way you're going to learn any police job is to actually do said police job. Roll up your sleeves and do police work. It's as simple as that. It's like chasing cars, something as simple as that. It's like you get better as the more cars you chase. It's a diminishing skill that if you don't keep that up, people are going to get hurt and bad stuff is going to happen. So you actually have to do it. There's no, yes, you can have training, you can have evac, you can go around racetracks with cones and whatever else. Nothing replaces 3 o'clock in the morning in a highly congested urban area, where you're going after some guy who just shot at you or shot at a cop or whatever the case may be, or a stolen car, or who knows what. So I was super happy that I was there. Then the chief of police was Arthur Jones at the time, highly controversial. And he decided to mix it all up and he transferred half the department. There was like almost 2,000 cops. He transferred half of us in one order. I'll never forget. My partner calls me. I'm working third shift. He calls me like at noon. Dude, are you up? And I'm like, no, but what? And he's like, dude, you've been transferred. I'm like, what? He says, yeah, you in half the shift. And I'm like, ugh, all right, where am I going? District 3. Well, it's right next to it. It's the same ghetto. It's the same everything. Yeah, just different geography. It's the same calls, same everything. I did that for a year. Then I took the promotion test and I became a sergeant. They send me to the south side. So I start back there again, midnight to 8. So where I worked, if you became a sergeant, you got knocked down in seniority. So city of Milwaukee, there's 200 sergeants for the city. So guess what? Now I'm at the very, very bottom. Like, all right, well, I guess I'll be working nights forever, but so be it, whatever. So I was on the south side. I worked there. Then I got late power, which was 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. And that was awesome because a lot of my cars were non-assignment taking cars where they weren't chasing the radio all night, where it's like, okay, I have an anti-armed robbery car. I've got a tavern car. And I'm in charge of all these. We had an AGU as an anti-gang unit. So I got to do some of the high-speed fun stuff where you're not like chained to the radio and you're just answering 911 calls all night long. So I was able to do that. Then got a bad divorce, had to go day shift after 17 years of working nights, and they sent me to the slowest district in the city. I thought I was going to lose my mind. Oh my gosh, that was not fun. But I learned to appreciate it because the victims there were, I hate to say it, real victims. The people committing the crimes didn't live in those neighborhoods. And you're talking about the pregnant housewife that gets carjacked and then the asshole has to kick her in the stomach a couple of times just for good measure. So you're dealing with that, and it's like, oof. So you actually felt like you were like accomplishing something, when you were getting bad guys. So I did that, and I thought I'd write out my career there, but I did not. I got sent back to District 2 for my last year and a half, where I started as a sergeant. And the neighborhood had quickly devolved. It was just as bad as the north side. And that's where I pulled the pin. And that was the end.
So, when did you decide and what made you decide to sit down and write a book?
It's funny you mentioned that. I had zero intention. And if you knew me in high school or college, I'm the last guy in the world. You think I'm not some scholar. I wasn't born with a typewriter in my hand. Mom was very happy about that. But, it just, what happened was, like I said, I'm on the waiting list for the Milwaukee Police Department, and I got to do something to pay the rent. So I'm selling cars, I'm bartending, yada, yada. And I get on the job and I was helping people buy cars, family, friends. I was on the other side of the desk. I know how this goes. And then I actually started a small business of helping people buy cars. It was like phone a friend, or if you want me to go with you, I'll charge you. If you're a friend or something like that, yeah, it might cost you a beer or a cigar or something like that, but nothing crazy. And I forget where it came from. They're like, you should write a book on how to buy a car. I'm like, you can do that? And I'm like, yeah. So long story, I had a line on an agent. Everything was looking honky dory. That ended in one night, but that's another story. And then I found out you could self-publish, and I had no idea. So I self-published my first book, and it was a glorified PDF. It was nothing super special, but it was a light bulb moment where I'm like, okay, people are buying this. They're complete strangers. They're not my mom, buying my book, that guy. And I'm actually making beer money off of this. So I'm like, that's interesting. Then another sergeant that I'm working with, he's working on his doctorate, and he was so sick of writing his thesis, he wrote a post-apocalyptic book. He made like 10 grand on it the first year. And it wasn't I'm not going to say it was a bad book. It was a great story, but like the editing was bad, the cover wasn't great. And I'm like, I can do that. So I wrote one, but the timing was off and maybe it wasn't that great. Didn't do so well. And I wrote a couple of other books. I'm doing all of this under the radar, under pen names, because in our agency, any kind of off-duty employment, you got to write a memo. It goes to the chief. And most of the time, the chief, if he doesn't understand it, and I know the chief didn't understand this, he'd just say no. So I just flew under the radar towards the end of my career with that.
What was your first big hit, if you will, as far as your books go?
Cops and writers over my shoulder there. What happened was I started going to writers conferences. There was one in Vegas that I used to go to every year, and it was called 20 Books to 50K. That was the name of the conference. And the premise was if you could have 20 books, if you could pump out 20 books a year, you should be able to make 50,000 a year. And the guy who started all this, his wife was, he met his, did he meet his wife? Yeah, I think he met his wife in Cancun. And, she's from Mexico. She was like an international pharmaceutical salesperson. And she's like, we could live very comfortably on $50,000 a year down here. So that was the thought process. Now, later on, I wound up writing 4 books with him. He has his own publishing company and he's like a millionaire, over and over and over again. But his work ethic is crazy, insane good. And he's super, super smart. But yeah, what happened was I'm at this conference, and all the magic happens not in the classroom, but at the happy hour or the dinners afterwards or whatever.
Like most conferences.
Yes, and one of the people that knows a lot more about this stuff than I do, they're like, "You're writing the wrong books. You should write books for authors about police procedure." And I'm like, I never thought of that. I didn't want to write policey stuff. He said, no, you got it wrong. He said, lean into what you know. And I'm like, all right. Because again, at these conferences or whatever, or I get phone calls or emails, and it's like, hey, would my character need a search warrant to do this? Can they break the door down for that? Can you get, fingerprints off of a rock like I see on television? Just stuff like that. And I was always eager to help them, and he said, make some money. And I'm like, okay. So I wrote the two cops and writers books. The first one was From the Academy to the Street. The second one is Crime Scenes and Investigations. And it was very rudimentary, taking somebody like, okay, you got a homicide. Who does what and when? And it just turned out to be a hit. And at the same time, I'm like, oh boy, I need to promote these books because writing a book is hard. Promoting it and marketing it is double hard. That is where the secret sauce is. That's tough. So I started a Facebook group for the same reason to help authors, answering their questions. It was me, my editor, and like a couple of buddies. And that today it's right around 8,500 people worldwide. I wound up in the front page of the Wall Street Journal. They did a story about that and me. And I mean, down at the very bottom, but I'm okay with that. It was a little paragraph, but then there was like a full page, almost a full page article about me, like 3 or 4 pages in. And I'm like, if you would have told me I'd be in the Wall Street Journal, I would have told you you're high. And I'm like, really? I thought the guy was joking when he called me, and I'm like, I'm getting punked right now, nope. So that has exploded, and then I started my Cops and Writers podcast to promote the books, and that grew likes. And then all of a sudden, it's like now that's super popular, and I'm like, all right, I guess you just work hard, and put your head down, and just keep on keeping on.
So, are you one of those people that nobody wants to watch a cop show or a cop movie with?
I'm pretty. My wife says that all the time. She said, "You're ruining it. You're ruining it." And it's like I can't help it. This is so bad. Oh my god.
So, authors, writers who want to write fiction primarily about a law enforcement
Yep.
topic, that's who comes to you, right? To explain,
Yes.
because I gotta say this, it does make me crazy when I read some sort of fiction or I see a movie or a TV show, and it's clear, and this is all of TV right now, I'm going to say that it's very clear that whoever wrote this has no clue and did no research and has no consultant when it comes to law enforcement, right?
Well, they might have consultants, but they just don't listen to them. I mean, obviously, it has to be, Hollywooded up. You got to have the action, whatever. My wife loved Bosch. Did you watch any of the Bosch?
Yeah, we have so many friends who are just in love with Bosch and shows like Bosch, books like the Bosch series.
Right. But, so I'm thinking to myself, okay, my wife wants to watch it. I'll watch it too. And the first episode was so cringeworthy. I am just like, really? You got the girl who just shot herself and he's sniffing the barrel. He's doing, and I'm just like, no, none of this. And a suit and tie detective running after some bad guy at 3 o'clock in the morning in a dark alley. Our guys would never, ever do. Are you kidding me? That's no, unless you're in some gang squad, where you're doing undercover, high speed undercover stuff. Yes, absolutely. But like your normal suit and tie detective, no, that's not happening. And the courtroom scene was ridiculous. But what they did get right was you kind of liked the character. You kind of liked Harry Bosch. So people, if you're going to be writing a book about police or anything else, the character comes before anything else. You know, you kind of fall in love with the character. Then they had Bosch Legacy with his daughter. That was forced and it was kind of cheesy. Then they had the third one, the gal that does cold case stuff. That's LAPD, and they put Harry Bosch in there. They inject him into it, once in a blue moon to, keep things going. But she is just the most unlikable character ever. She never smiles. Ballard, that's what it was called.
Mm.
I don't think it's been picked up for another season. Maybe it has, but I don't know. I'm not going to watch it because there was zero humor. Everything was forced. Everything was DEI. You had like a civilian that looked like a bowling ball running after some dude, and it's like, no, absolutely not. And the main character was always brooding, and I'm like, why is she so sad and broody all the time? Does She's got a really shitty life. It's like, yeah, lighten up, Francis. Jeez.
So how have you seen things evolve? We'll talk about reality in a moment, but just from a fiction standpoint, how have you seen um as a writer and somebody involved in uh information when it comes to writers about law enforcement, how have you seen things evolve over the last, say, 15, 20 years?
You know, again, if it's a good book, you can overlook a lot of stuff. If it's a good story, you can overlook a lot of stuff. It used to be one of the biggest traps that authors get trapped in is they pigeonhole the cop as either, everyone's a detective or everybody's a boss. And either they're the stoic, no sense of humor at all, or they're crazy and off the rails. They're on the verge of getting fired all the time and getting criminally charged. And the stuff that they're doing, yes, they would be fired and they would be criminally charged for the stuff that they're doing. It just, in the last like 20 years, maybe they've injected some of the tech, a little more of the tech, you know, a little more of this science as far as DNA goes. That's exploded, but they're still unrealistic. It's like, okay, if you're at a crime scene and your DNA is at there, Betsy, but you've never been arrested and your DNA isn't out there, I can't just pick it up out of the blue, and I'm
Right.
not going
There's
to get it
really not an international database on
right.
all
And
of our all of our
yeah, I don't get
DNA.
swabbed. Babies don't get swabbed, when they come out of the womb. It's just silliness. And it takes more than, 1 hour to get the DNA results, that kind of thing, the CSI effect, those types of things. And what I see too, and I think it's a disservice to females and minorities, is they pigeonhole these characters, and they're going first with the, well, I have to have X amount of females, I have to have X amount of minorities, I have to have this gay guy in here, because that's what's popular right now. Instead of, hey, that's a really good character. I'm getting emotionally invested in that character. You know what? Party on. I love him. This is great. Instead of forcing things, let it happen. So that's the biggest, what I've seen through the years.
Yeah, I believe that DEI has ruined everything, and
Oh,
that's one of the things. I'll always have people that know me and they're like, "Oh, you got to read this book or this series," because it's the main character is a female cop, and I'll start reading it or I'll look into it, and she's always either some single woman who can't keep a man, and it's her and her cat that live
yeah.
together, and or it's some other ridiculous. It's usually very ridiculous, and it's
Yes.
it's completely unrealistic. And so I have kind of given up on that genre because they really, I'm like, can't you, if you never talked to a female cop? I did have one author who is a friend of mine, who, this is years ago, who spent hours and hours and hours writing along with me, and wanted to write a series
Mm,
about a woman cop, and he
yeah.
went through, kind of her life. It was a great series. But he actually talked to you, and I set him up with other women cops to talk to, and it was the most realistic series. But like you said, DEI really has no place in fiction, just because you've inserted X amount of characters doesn't mean people are going to like them. And that's
Right.
kind of how it is in reality, right?
Oh,
DEI is negatively impacting our profession, isn't it? You and I both started in the 80s. It was a great time to
uh,
be a cop. And then in the 90s, we kicked ass as well. And now all of a sudden in 2026, you've got ridiculous initiatives like 30 by 30. We got to have
yeah.
30% female cops by 2030, and other ridiculous, especially in large blue cities like yours, right?
Yeah. Well, look at Cheadle, the Secret Service. How did that work out?
Yeah,
Yeah, I
right.
mean, how did that work out for you there, man? But my first partner on the job was female, and I would follow her to, through any kind of war or fire or whatever. She was my favorite partner, and she was my first one. And this is actually when you worked with a partner every night. There's somebody sitting next to you in a squad car. Especially in the neighborhoods where I worked. It was almost mandatory. There were some nights where, yeah, you were one man because, stuff happens. People get sick, they're on vacation, whatever. But it's a disservice, I think. It's they I could go on and on. It's like we had one instructor in the academy that I was already out of the academy, but a buddy of mine was an instructor at the academy, later, and he got kicked out because he was a captain at the academy. And he says, for you females in the classroom, you have a special gift that us men don't have. You can talk to people that in a way that us men cannot, blah, blah, blah. So he's still in the room. So my buddy goes to the podium and says, if you think you could disregard your verbal judo and the skills that we're training you just because you have a vagina, you're sadly mistaken. You have to go through the training. You have to do this right. Just because you're a woman does not give you carte blanche that now you're going to be the super communicator that's going to. I can't tell you how many female cops that wrote checks when I was on the street that we big guys would have to cash. I worked with female cops that could make Gandhi a fighter. Yeah, I could then make Mother Teresa a no person. Yeah, and I'm just like, would you please shut up? I don't feel like fighting with anybody tonight. But guess what's going to happen? Because you at 5 foot nothing, 100 pounds, you might get one like little zap in, but guess who's going to be rolling on the ground with Mr. Asshole? It'll
Right.
be
Sex is not a sole indicator of your
no.
ability to do anything. It's got to be a complete package. I've been teaching that for decades. So I got to tell you, well, first of all, I wish I had another hour to talk to you, because
Yes.
we could go in so many different
Well,
directions.
I'm going to be interviewing you later, so that's good. Yeah.
So do me a favor, tell people where they can find you, where they can find the books. How can people hear more about you and more from you, Pat?
Cops and Writers. My website is copsandwriters, .com. It's got all my socials on there. It's got links to my books, and my podcast is Cops and Writers. I'm on, Apple, Spotify, I think like 20 other
Yeah, you're
platforms.
everywhere.
Yeah. So, and I have a YouTube channel as well. So yeah, if you put in Cops and Writers, Patrick O'Donnell, you'll find me.
Perfect. Well, I got to tell you, Sarge, it's been so great to spend time with you, and I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. And if you'd like more information about the National Police Association, you can visit us at nationalpolice.org.
Every day, the brave men and women of law enforcement put their lives on the line to keep us safe. But they need our help to continue their mission. Activist politicians, progressive prosecutors, the ACLU, and the rest of the anti-police forces receive millions in donations from extremist pro-criminal elements like George Soros and woke corporations. The National Police Association is fighting them in courts around the country, including the United States Supreme Court, defending officers who are being attacked for doing their jobs. Additionally, the National Police Association works year-round to pass tough-on-crime legislation to put and keep criminals behind bars. Consider going to nationalpolice.org and donating to keep us in the fight. Together we can win. That is nationalpolice.org.